The blood on Grace Whitmore's lip had frozen solid by the time the freight car doors scraped open in Cedar Ridge, Wyoming. 3 weeks married. 3 weeks in hell. She stumbled onto the wooden platform, her blue dress torn at the shoulder, bruises like dark flowers blooming across her collarbone where Vernon Blackwood's fingers had dug in the night before.
I came as fast as
in
I
her
could.
Pocket, 9 cents
What is
and a
it?
letter
What's
from a man
happened?
she'd never
Trouble's
met.
coming. We
The
have
station
to
master
leave.
took one look at her
No.
and turned away. Women on the boardwalk clutched their children closer when Grace passed, as if whatever violence had marked her might be contagious. 2 men outside the saloon stopped talking mid-sentence, their eyes following her with the cold assessment men reserved for wounded animals and fallen women. A shopkeeper sweeping his front steps paused to stare. Grace heard his wife's voice drift from inside. Look at the state of her. Probably ran off from her husband. These Eastern women come west thinking it's all adventure and romance, then can't handle real work. Grace kept walking, kept her eyes forward. Let them think what they wanted. She'd survived worse than their judgment. Their whispers couldn't hurt her the way Vernon's fists had. In the West, a woman's misfortune was her own business. The afternoon sun beat down merciless on the dusty street. Cedar Ridge wasn't much to look at in the summer of 1885. 2 saloons, a general store, a boarding house with peeling paint, and the promise of something better that never quite arrived. Grace touched her split lip gingerly, the metallic taste of blood mixed with alkali dust. Her hands shook as she unfolded the letter she'd read 100 times. The paper was soft from handling, the ink faded, but still legible. Miss Whitmore, I received your correspondence regarding employment as housekeeper and cook at Broken Creek Ranch. The position remains available. Wages $40 for 2 months' work during roundup season. Room and board provided. No other expectations. Respectfully, Cole Brennan. No other expectations. Those 3 words had saved her life. But first, she had to understand how she'd ended up in Vernon Blackwood's hands instead of Cole Brennan's in the first place. Boston felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been only 2 months. Grace had been Catherine Whitmore then, a seamstress in a boarding house on Tremont Street. 23 years old, with nimble fingers and no prospects. Her father had died owing $600 to men who didn't forgive debts. Her mother had walked into Boston Harbor 3 days after the funeral, her pockets full of stones. Grace inherited nothing but the debt and a tin box of letters her mother had saved. Among them, she found advertisements, men in the West seeking wives, ranchers, miners, shopkeepers, all promising respectability, security, a new start. She'd written to 5 of them. Only one had written back with something that wasn't a marriage proposal. Cole Brennan of Broken Creek Ranch, Wyoming Territory, needed help during roundup season. He'd lost his wife 7 years prior. He had a young daughter. He needed someone who could cook for 12 cowboys, mend clothes, keep house. 2 months' work, $40. After that, Grace would be free to stay or go as she pleased. It was the freedom that had decided her. Not a proposal, not a promise of forever, just honest work and honest pay. She'd taken her savings, $87 earned a penny at a time, and bought a train ticket west. The journey had stretched across America like an unspooling thread. Boston to Chicago took 3 days. Chicago to Omaha took another 4. The train rattled through farmland and prairie, through small towns that looked identical in their dusty hopelessness, through landscapes so vast they made Grace feel like a speck of dust blown across the continent. In Chicago, she'd shared a bench with a widow heading to Denver. The woman had warned her about the West. It's not like the advertisements say. The men are harder. The life is harder. You'll work until your hands bleed and still barely scrape by. Grace had thanked her for the advice, but hadn't changed course. What choice did she have? Boston held nothing but memories of failure and loss. The West at least offered possibility. The first leg of her journey had gone smoothly enough. Boston to Chicago. Chicago to Omaha. But in Omaha, everything had changed. She'd been waiting on the platform for the connection to Cheyenne when a man approached. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wore a cattleman's coat and the good boots, looked respectable enough. "Miss Whitmore? Grace Whitmore, bound for Wyoming?" She'd been startled to hear her name. "Yes, I am. How did you know?" "Cole Brennan sent me to meet you. Change of plans, you see. He's dealing with some trouble at the ranch. Asked me to bring you the rest of the way. I'm Vernon Blackwood, his neighbor. Got a place just north of Broken Creek." He'd extended his hand. Grace, tired from days of travel and relieved to be met by someone who knew her destination, had taken it. His grip was firm, too firm. Something in his eyes made her uneasy, but she pushed the feeling down. She was being foolish, suspicious of kindness because she'd known so little of it. "That's very generous of Mr. Brennan," she'd said, "and kind of you to come all this way." "No trouble at all. Cole and I are good friends. Help each other out when we can." Vernon had helped her with her single carpet bag, led her to a wagon waiting outside the station. The first sign something was wrong came when they bypassed Cheyenne entirely. Vernon explained they'd take a more direct route. The roads were rough, he said. Better to avoid the main highways where bandits sometimes waited. Grace had accepted this. She knew nothing of Wyoming geography, had no reason to doubt him. The second sign came when they arrived not at a ranch but at a rough homestead with sagging fences and a house that leaned to one side like a drunk. The barn roof had holes. The corral held 6 scrawny cattle that looked half-starved. This was nothing like the prosperous ranch Cole Brennan had described in his letters. "This isn't Broken Creek," Grace had said, fear creeping up her spine. Vernon's smile had vanished like smoke. "No, miss, this is Blackwood Ranch, and you're going to be my wife." He'd produced a paper then, a marriage contract. At the bottom, her signature. Except Grace had never signed any such document. The writing looked like hers, the loops and curves carefully mimicked, but she would have remembered signing something so binding. "I never agreed to this," she'd said, backing toward the wagon. "This is a mistake. I need to get to Broken Creek Ranch." Vernon had stepped between her and the wagon. "There's no mistake. I paid good money for that train ticket, forged your name real careful on the contract. Far as anyone in Wyoming territory knows, you came here willing to be my bride. You try to leave, I'll have the sheriff drag you back for breach of contract and theft of the ticket price." Grace had tried to run. Vernon caught her before she made it 10 feet. His hands had closed around her arms like iron bands, lifting her off her feet, carrying her into the house while she screamed. No one came. There was no one to hear. Instead, he'd thrown her into a small room, locked the door, left her there in darkness while she beat her fists against the wood until they bled. For 3 weeks, Grace had lived in a nightmare. Vernon wasn't a rancher. He was a card sharp and a liar who survived by cheating at poker and scamming mail-order brides. She was the 4th woman he'd intercepted. She'd learned this from Jacob, Vernon's 14-year-old son, a sullen boy with old eyes who brought her food when his father was too drunk to remember. "My ma was number 1, Jacob had told her through the locked door. Pa said she died of fever, but I heard her screaming. I was 8, I remember." Grace had seen the graves behind the house through her window. 3 wooden crosses, no names, no dates. Just raw earth and rotting wood marking where women had been buried and forgotten. Vernon didn't work. He left for days at a time, gambling in Cheyenne or Laramie, coming back drunk and mean. When he was home, he forced Grace to cook and clean and submit to his attentions at night. She'd fought him the first time. He'd beaten her so badly she couldn't stand for 2 days. After that, she'd learned to go still and quiet, to let her mind float away somewhere else while he used her body. Survival meant compliance. Resistance meant pain. But Grace had been planning, watching, waiting for her chance. Vernon kept money in a tin box under his bed. Not much. maybe $30 in coins and small bills. Grace had stolen $2 over the course of 3 weeks, a few coins at a time, hiding them in the seam of her dress. She'd also stolen a small knife from the kitchen, hidden it in her boot. On the 21st night, Vernon had come home drunker than usual. He'd passed out on the kitchen floor, snoring like a sawmill. Grace had waited 2 hours to be sure he wouldn't wake. Then she'd picked the lock on her door using a hairpin, the way she'd seen a thief do once in Boston. The house had been silent, dark. She'd crept toward the front door, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. That's when Jacob had appeared from the shadows. Grace had frozen, certain he would wake his father. But the boy had just looked at her with those ancient, sorrowful eyes. "Go," he'd whispered. "East toward Cedar Ridge. There's a town there. Maybe someone will help you. Your father will know you let me out. I don't care anymore. I'm tired of watching people die." Grace had wanted to take him with her, but Jacob had shaken his head. "I gotta stay. Someone's gotta bury you proper if he catches you. Someone's gotta remember your name." She'd left then, running into the darkness with nothing but the clothes on her back and the letter from Cole Brennan she'd hidden in her bodice. The 9 cents in stolen coins weighed heavy in her pocket. Blood money, freedom money. She'd walked through the night, following the stars east like runaway slaves had once followed north. When dawn came, she'd hidden in an abandoned barn, sleeping fitfully in the hay, startling awake at every sound. The second day she'd found a stream and drank until her stomach ached. Found wild berries growing near the water. Ate them even though she didn't know if they were poisonous. Better to die from berries than go back to Vernon. On the second evening, a farmer's wagon had found her collapsed by the side of the road. The farmer, an old German with kind eyes, had given her water and bread, asked no questions, taken her to Cedar Ridge, and left her at the station with a tip of his hat. "Good luck, miss. Whatever you're running from, I hope you outrun it." Now, Grace stood on the main street of Cedar Ridge, 9 cents to her name, and tried to remember how to breathe. Tried to remember what it felt like to be a person instead of property. Broken Creek Ranch was 6 miles north. She could walk it. She'd walked further on less hope. Grace started down the street, ignoring the stairs. A woman alone always drew attention. A woman alone and clearly roughed up drew speculation. She kept her eyes forward and her steps steady, even though her legs trembled with exhaustion. She was passing the boarding house when a woman's voice cut through the afternoon heat. "You're bleeding on my boardwalk." Grace stopped. The woman stood in the doorway, arms crossed over a flour-dusted apron. She was perhaps 55, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, face weathered by wind and sun. Her eyes were sharp, but not unkind. She had the look of someone who'd seen trouble enough times to recognize it on sight. "I apologize, ma'am," Grace said, touching her lip. It had split open again. "I'll move along." "Where are you headed? Looking like something a coyote dragged in." "Broken Creek Ranch. I have business with Mr. Cole Brennan." The woman's expression shifted. Something flickered there, surprise maybe, or concern. She stepped out onto the boardwalk, studying Grace more closely. "You got business with Cole Brennan? What kind of business?" "I have a letter of employment. I'm meant to cook for his roundup crew." The woman's eyebrows rose. "You're the one he was expecting 3 weeks back." Grace's heart lurched. He was expecting me? Then the letter was real. He really did send for me. "Got a letter about 10 days ago saying you'd changed your mind. Married some fellow in Omaha instead." Cole wasn't pleased. He doesn't like being made a fool of. Grace's hands clenched. The letter was a lie. I never wrote it. I was intercepted in Omaha by a man named Vernon Blackwood who pretended to be Mr. Brennan's associate. He took me to his homestead under false pretenses, kept me there against my will. I escaped 2 days ago. The woman's face went still, then hard. "Vernon Blackwood. You know him?" "Everyone knows of him. Nasty piece of work, but he's careful. Never leaves evidence. Sheriff can't touch him." She looked Grace up and down again, taking in the torn dress, the bruises, the exhaustion written in every line of her body. "How'd you get away?" His son let me out while Vernon was passed out drunk. Jacob, poor boy. He's seen things no child should see. The woman stepped aside, gesturing toward her door. Come in. You look half dead. I'm Rosie McCall. I run this boarding house, and I've known Cole Brennan for 15 years. If you've got a legitimate claim on that job, you'll need to clean up before you go presenting yourself at his door. Grace followed her inside, almost lightheaded with relief. The boarding house was simple but clean, lace curtains on the windows, a parlor with worn but comfortable furniture, the smell of bread baking somewhere in the back. It reminded Grace achingly of the Boston boarding house where she'd lived, where life had been hard but at least predictable. Rosie led her up narrow stairs to a back room with a wash basin and a change of clothes laid out on the bed, a simple gray cotton dress, clean stockings, a comb. These belong to my daughter, Rosie said. She's out in California now, married to a banker. Got 2 children I've never met. These'll fit you well enough. You're about her size. I can't pay you, Grace said, the words stuck in her throat. Not yet. Maybe not ever, depending on whether Mr. Brennan believes me. Didn't ask you to pay. Can't send you up to Broken Creek looking like you've been dragged behind a horse. Cole's got enough reasons to be suspicious without you showing up half dead on his doorstep. Rosie paused at the door. Clean yourself up. I'll make coffee and food. You look like you haven't eaten proper in days. When Grace emerged 20 minutes later, scrubbed raw and dressed in borrowed clothes, Rosie was waiting with coffee and bread and cold chicken. Grace ate like she was starving, because she was. The food sat heavy in her stomach, real food, not the scraps Vernon had thrown her way. Vernon Blackwood, Rosie said, refilling Grace's coffee cup. I've heard stories. Women who go to his place and disappear? He always has papers saying they left willingly or died of natural causes. But there's talk. There's always been talk. There are graves behind his house, Grace said quietly. 3 of them, no names. Jacob said his mother was the first. Rosie's face went hard as flint. That boy needs rescuing same as you did. But getting him away from Vernon would take the law, and we don't have much law out here that's worth trusting. I saw the graves through my window, 3 crosses. The wood was rotting, like they'd been there years. You'll need to tell this to Cole, and probably to Sheriff Porter, though I don't know what good it'll do. Vernon's slippery, always has been. Rosie leaned forward, her eyes serious. But Grace, I need to be straight with you. Cole Brennan's not an easy man. Lost his wife Sarah 7 years back when their daughter was born. Sarah bled out before the doctor could get there through a snowstorm. Cole blamed himself, still does. He closed himself off after that, shut down. He's good to his men and devoted to that little girl, but he doesn't trust easy. And he sure as hell doesn't trust women who show up with hard luck stories. I have his letter, Grace said. I can prove he sent for me. That'll help. But Vernon sending that fake letter in your name, that complicates things. Cole thinks you rejected him, made him look foolish. He won't take kindly to that, even if it wasn't your doing. Grace set down her coffee cup. Her hands were steady now. The food and coffee had restored some of her strength. I didn't come 1,000 miles to be turned away at the door, Mrs. McCall. I'll prove I'm worth hiring. I'll work harder than any man he's got. I'll show him I'm not a liar or a schemer or whatever else he thinks I am. Rosie smiled for the first time. It transformed her stern face into something almost gentle. You've got spine, girl. That's good. You'll need every bit of it. The walk to Broken Creek Ranch took 2 hours in the afternoon heat. Rosie had offered to lend Grace a horse, but Grace had refused. She needed the time to prepare herself, needed to feel the ground solid under her feet, needed to prove to herself that she could still walk forward instead of running away. The landscape opened up the further she got from town. Rolling grassland stretched to distant mountains, purple and hazy in the heat. Cattle grazed in scattered clusters, red bodies against yellow grass. Hawks circled overhead. The sky was so big it made Grace dizzy after the cramped streets of Boston. This was a different world entirely. harsh and beautiful and utterly indifferent to human suffering. Broken Creek Ranch appeared first as a smudge on the horizon, then gradually took shape as Grace walked closer. A sturdy two-story house with a wide porch and real glass windows, a large barn freshly painted, corrals with horses that looked well-fed and healthy, several outbuildings in good repair, fences that ran straight and true. It looked prosperous, well-maintained, everything Vernon's place had not been. Grace's courage wavered as she approached the main house. What if Cole Brennan turned her away? What if he believed Vernon's lies? What if there was no job after all, and she'd gambled everything on a letter from a stranger who owed her nothing? She climbed the porch steps. Her legs shook. She raised her hand and knocked on the door. For a long moment, nothing. Then footsteps. Heavy, measured. The door opened. The man who stood there was not what Grace expected. Cole Brennan was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, hardened build of someone who worked cattle every day of his life. His hair was dark brown, shot through with gray at the temples. His beard was short and neat, not the wild tangle she'd half expected, but it was his eyes that stopped her. Gray as a winter sky and just as cold. Eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little. He looked her up and down without expression, taking in the borrowed dress, the fading bruises on her face, the way she held herself like someone expecting a blow. "Help you?" His voice was deep, rough-edged, not unkind but not welcoming either. Grace's throat went dry. She forced herself to speak. "Mr. Brennan, my name is Grace Whitmore. I'm here about the position you advertised. Cook and housekeeper for roundup season." Something flickered in those cold eyes. Surprise, definitely. Then suspicion, quick and sharp. "You're 3 weeks late, and you sent a letter saying you'd married someone else in Omaha." "I never sent that letter, sir. I was intercepted in Omaha by a man named Vernon Blackwood, who pretended to be your associate. He told me you'd sent him to fetch me. He took me to his homestead under false pretenses. I was held there against my will for 3 weeks. I escaped 2 days ago." Cole's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Vernon Blackwood?" "Yes, sir." "You're telling me you've spent the last 3 weeks at Blackwood's place?" "Against my will, yes, sir. And now you show up here with a story about being kidnapped and held prisoner, and you expect me to believe you and give you a job." Grace met his eyes steadily, refused to look away, even though those gray eyes felt like they could see straight through to her lying, thieving, desperate heart. "I have your letter, Mr. Brennan, the original one, the one offering me employment. I've carried it with me since I left Boston. I can show you." She reached into the pocket of her borrowed dress and withdrew the folded paper. It was creased and worn from being read so many times. Cole took it from her, unfolded it carefully, scanned the contents. His expression didn't soften. "This is my letter," he said flatly. "Doesn't prove you didn't change your mind and decide to go with Blackwood instead. Doesn't prove you're not working with him now to con me somehow." Grace felt anger flare beneath her exhaustion, hot and bright and dangerous. "Why would I con you? What would I possibly gain? I have 9 cents to my name and bruises from a man who kept me locked in a room. I walked 2 days to get here. I'm asking for honest work, not charity. Blackwood's been trying to buy my water rights for 2 years. I've refused every offer. Maybe he thinks sending a woman to worm her way into my household will give him leverage. Information, a way to sabotage me from the inside. That's absurd, is it? You show up bruised and desperate with a perfect sob story. You've got every reason to make me sympathetic. Women have used worse tricks to get what they want." Grace's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I don't want your sympathy, Mr. Brennan. I don't want your pity or your protection or anything except what you offered in that letter. Honest work for honest pay. 2 months cooking for your crew. $40. That's all I've ever wanted from you. If you don't believe me, that's your choice. But I've come 1,000 miles, survived things you couldn't begin to imagine, and I'm not going to stand here and be accused of scheming when all I did was answer your letter in good faith." For a long moment, Cole just stared at her. Grace stared back, refusing to flinch, refusing to show weakness even though exhaustion was making her sway on her feet. Finally, Cole spoke. His voice was quieter, but no warmer. "I didn't order a bride, Miss Whitmore. I ordered a housekeeper. I've got no interest in marriage, no interest in complications, no interest in whatever romantic notions you might be harboring. If you're looking for a husband, you're at the wrong ranch." "I'm looking for work," Grace said flatly. "Nothing more, nothing less. Work's hard here. We're running roundup starting Monday. That means 12 men who'll need 3 meals a day plus coffee whenever they want it. 18-hour days, back-breaking labor, no complaints, no tears, no running to me saying the men are crude or the work's too hard. I can handle it. You ever cooked for a cattle crew before? I cooked for 50 residents at a boarding house in Boston. Breakfast, dinner, and supper every day for 2 years. I imagine cowboys eat the same as anyone else, just more of it." Cole's mouth twitched. It might have been the ghost of a smile, though it was hard to tell. They eat twice as much as normal people, and they're 3 times as loud when the food's bad. "Then I'll make sure the food's good." Another silence. Cole seemed to be weighing something, studying her like she was a horse he was considering buying. Finally, he stepped back from the door. 2 months, $40 like I said in the letter. You'll sleep in the bunkhouse loft. You'll cook 3 meals, keep the kitchen clean, mend clothes, and do whatever else needs doing. You cause trouble, you're gone. You steal anything, you're gone. You bring Vernon Blackwood's business to my doorstep, you're gone immediately. Those are the terms, you understand? Relief flooded through Grace so powerfully she almost staggered. "I understand, Mr. Brennan. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You haven't started the work." Cole turned and called into the house. "Silas, get out here." A man emerged from somewhere in the back of the house. He was older, late 50s probably, with a face like tanned leather and eyes the color of faded denim. He wore dusty work clothes and walked with the slight bow-legged gait of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. He took in Grace with a single comprehensive glance that missed nothing, then looked at Cole with raised eyebrows. "This is Grace Whitmore," Cole said. "She's our new cook for Roundup. Show her the bunkhouse and the kitchen setup. Get her settled in. Answer her questions." "Yes, boss." The older man, Silas apparently, stepped onto the porch and gave Grace a small nod. "Ma'am, welcome to Broken Creek Ranch. I'm Silas Turner, trail boss." Cole looked at Grace one more time. Those winter-gray eyes held hers for a long moment. "Don't make me regret this, Miss Whitmore." Then he turned and walked back into the house, closing the door behind him with a decisive click. Silas waited until Cole was gone, then let out a low whistle. "Well now, that's the first time in 7 years I've seen Cole hire a woman for anything more than laundry. You must have made quite an impression." "He thinks I'm a liar and possibly a spy for Vernon Blackwood," Grace said tiredly. "Oh, he definitely thinks that. But he hired you anyway, which means something." Silas started walking toward the barn, his bow-legged stride surprisingly quick. "Come on, I'll show you where you'll be bunking." The bunkhouse was a long, low building made of rough-hewn logs chinked with mud. Inside it was dim and smelled of leather and tobacco and unwashed men. Bunks lined both walls, each with a thin mattress and a wool blanket. At the far end, a wooden ladder led up to a loft space under the eaves. Silas gestured up. "That'll be yours. It's not fancy, but it's private and it's clean. You'll have a bed, a trunk for your things, a wash basin. There's a window for air. Outhouse is 50 yards north of here. You'll be sharing it with the men, so I'd suggest going early morning or late evening when traffic's lighter." Grace climbed the ladder and found herself in a surprisingly clean space. The loft was maybe 8 feet by 10, with a sloped ceiling that came down to about 4 feet on the sides, but there was a real bed with a corn husk mattress and clean linens. A sturdy trunk sat at the foot of the bed. A small table held a wash basin and pitcher, and there was indeed a window, currently open, to let in the afternoon breeze. "It's perfect," Grace said, climbing back down. "Thank you, Mr. Turner." "Just Silas, ma'am. We don't stand much on formality here." He led her out of the bunkhouse and toward the main house. "Kitchen's in the back. That's where you'll be spending most of your time." They entered through a side door into a large, well-organized kitchen. Grace's seamstress eye immediately appreciated the efficiency of the layout. A massive cast-iron stove dominated one wall, already radiating heat even though nothing was cooking. Shelves lined another wall, neatly stocked with flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, dried apples, coffee, sugar. A sturdy work table stood in the center of the room, scarred from years of use but scrubbed clean. Windows faced east, positioned to catch the morning light. Hooks on the walls held pots, pans, ladles, all the tools she'd need. Grace ran her hand over the work table. The wood was smooth under her palm, worn down by countless meals prepared, countless hands working. This she could work with. This felt like possibility, like a fresh start. "Vernon Blackwood really kidnap you?" Silas asked quietly. Grace turned. The old cowboy's face was sympathetic but cautious, like he wanted to believe her but had seen too many lies to accept anything at face value. "Yes," she said simply. "He intercepted me in Omaha, pretended to be Mr. Brennan's associate, claimed he was taking me to Broken Creek. Instead, he took me to his homestead, locked me in a room, told me I was his wife according to a forged contract. I was there 3 weeks before his son helped me escape." Silas's jaw tightened, the muscles bunching under weathered skin. "Lord have mercy. I'm sorry that happened to you, ma'am. Vernon's bad news. We've all known it for years, but he's careful, slippery as a snake and twice as mean. He never leaves evidence the law can use. Women go to his place and they disappear, but he always has papers explaining it away." "There are 3 graves behind his house," Grace said. "Wooden crosses with no names. I saw them from the window of the room where he kept me locked up." "Sweet Jesus." Silas removed his hat, ran a hand through his thinning gray hair. "You need to tell that to Sheriff Porter. He's a decent man, one of the few lawmen out here worth a damn. If there's evidence of murder, he'll investigate." "Will he believe me? Against Vernon's word? Hard to say. But if you're willing to show him those graves, if Jacob will testify, maybe there's a chance." Silas replaced his hat. "But I need to warn you, Grace. Vernon won't let this go. If you really were at his place and you escaped, he'll come looking. He'll claim you're his legal wife, that you owe him money, that you stole from him. He'll make it ugly and public. He'll try to ruin your reputation so thoroughly that no one will hire you." "Let him try," Grace said quietly. "I'm not running anymore. I'm tired of running." Silas studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, then. You've got backbone. That's good. You'll need it working here. Cole's a fair man, but he's hard. He expects everyone to pull their weight. No excuses. No special treatment." He showed her where everything was kept. The pantry with its organized shelves. The root cellar where vegetables and preserved food stayed cool. The smokehouse for curing meat. The spring house where milk and butter were stored. The hen house where she'd collect eggs each morning. He explained Cole's preferences. Coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. Biscuits with every meal. Plenty of meat. No fancy sauces or complicated dishes, just good, solid food that would keep working men going from dawn to dark. Grace absorbed it all, her mind already planning menus, calculating quantities, organizing her approach. This was familiar territory. She'd run a boarding house kitchen. She could run a ranch kitchen. When Silas finally left her alone, Grace stood at the kitchen window and looked out over the ranch. In the distance, she could see cowboys working with horses in the main corral, their movements practiced and efficient. The sun was starting its slow descent toward the western mountains, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. She'd made it. Against impossible odds, she'd made it to the place she was meant to be. Now she just had to prove she deserved to stay. The next morning, Grace woke in darkness to the sound of roosters crowing. She dressed quickly in the dim light of dawn, climbed down the bunkhouse ladder, and made her way to the kitchen. The ranch was just beginning to stir. Lanterns flickered in the barn. She could hear the low voices of men starting their day. Grace lit the kitchen stove, set coffee to boil in the huge enameled pot, and began on breakfast. Biscuits first, mixing flour and lard and buttermilk with practiced efficiency. While they baked, she fried thick slices of salt pork until they were crispy, then used the rendered fat to scramble 24 eggs. She made gravy from the pan drippings, thick and peppery. Simple food, but good food. The kind that would stick to ribs and provide energy for hard physical labor. The cowboys started appearing around 5:30, drawn by the smell of coffee and frying meat. They came in groups of 2 and 3, stomping dust from their boots, hanging their hats on pegs by the door. They were a rough-looking bunch, unshaven and dirty from yesterday's work, loud and profane until they saw Grace at the stove. Then they fell silent, staring. "Well, hell," one of them finally said, a big man with a red beard and hands the size of dinner plates. Cole finally hired himself a cook. "Mind your language, Hank," Silas said, appearing behind them like a stern schoolmaster. "This is Miss Whitmore. She'll be cooking for us during roundup season. You treat her with respect, or you answer to me and Cole both. We clear?" A chorus of "Yes, Silas" went around the room. The men shuffled to the long table that dominated the dining area and took their seats. Grace served them without comment, setting platters of biscuits and meat and eggs in the center of the table, pouring coffee into tin cups. The men ate in silence at first, too hungry or too shy to speak. Then gradually they began talking amongst themselves. Talk of cattle movements, of fences that needed mending, of a water source in the north pasture that was running lower than it should this late in summer. One young cowboy kept staring at Grace. He couldn't have been more than 18, with red hair, freckles, and the gangling build of someone who hadn't quite grown into his adult body. Finally, he worked up the courage to speak. "Biscuits are real good, ma'am." Grace smiled at him. "Thank you, Mr. Tom, ma'am. Just Tom. Nobody calls me Mr. "Well, thank you, Tom. I'm glad you like them." Another cowboy snorted into his coffee. "Like them? These are the best biscuits we've had since old Cookie left last year. Cookie couldn't cook worth a damn. His biscuits could have been used for building materials." "I said watch your language," Silas warned from his seat at the end of the table. Grace refilled coffee cups and went back to the stove to scramble more eggs. The men were eating faster than she'd anticipated. She made a mental note to increase quantities for tomorrow. She was scraping the last of the eggs onto a serving platter when the kitchen door opened and Cole walked in. The room went instantly quiet. Even the sound of chewing seemed to stop. Cole scanned the table, taking in the empty platters, the men's satisfied faces, the general atmosphere of contentment. His eyes moved to Grace. "Morning, Miss Whitmore." "Good morning, Mr. Brennan. Would you like breakfast?" "Please." Grace fixed him a plate, making sure to give him the best biscuits, the crispiest bacon. Cole sat at the head of the table and ate methodically, his expression revealing nothing. The cowboys watched him nervously, like students waiting for a teacher's judgment. When Cole finished, he stood, drained his coffee cup, and set it carefully on the table. "Good," he said simply. Then he walked out. The cowboys let out a collective breath. Tom grinned at Grace. High praise from the boss. He actually used a positive word. Silas chuckled. "Don't let it go to your head, Miss Whitmore. Cole's compliments are rare as hen's teeth. But when he gives one, he means it." Grace allowed herself a small smile as she began clearing plates. One meal down. Only a few hundred more to go. The days fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Grace woke before dawn, started coffee, prepared breakfast for hungry men who worked from sunup to sundown. She learned their names and preferences. Tom liked extra jam on his biscuits. Miguel, a quiet man with Mexican heritage and magic hands with horses, preferred his coffee with sugar. Luke, Cole's 18-year-old nephew, ate enough for 3 men and was always first in line. Marcus, the oldest cowboy after Silas, had a scarred face and surprisingly gentle manner. They tested her at first, the way men always tested women in their domain. They asked for complicated dishes, made messes, left dirty boots where she'd have to clean around them. Grace never complained. She cooked whatever they requested if she had the ingredients. She cleaned up their messes without comment. She mended their torn shirts and ripped chaps without being asked. By the fourth day, something had shifted. Tom started carrying water buckets for her without prompting. Miguel brought in firewood each morning. Marcus washed dishes after dinner, his big scarred hands surprisingly careful with the tin plates. Luke stopped tracking mud across her clean floor. Grace knew she was winning them over. But Cole remained distant as the mountains on the horizon. He ate her meals without comment beyond that single good on the first morning. He nodded when they passed each other. But he never spoke to her beyond what was absolutely necessary, never asked how she was settling in, never acknowledged her presence beyond the purely functional. It was like being invisible, like being a useful tool, but not quite human. On the fourth evening, as Grace was scrubbing the last of the dinner pots, she heard a child's voice from somewhere in the main house, high and sweet, singing something tuneless and happy. Lily, Cole's daughter. Grace still hadn't met her. The little girl had been staying with a neighboring family while Cole prepared for roundup season. Grace finished the dishes and was drying her hands when the kitchen door creaked open. A small figure stood silhouetted against the golden evening light. "Papa said there's a new lady here." Grace turned slowly, not wanting to startle the child. The little girl was perhaps 6 years old, small for her age, with dark hair in 2 careful braids, and her father's distinctive gray eyes. She wore a simple calico dress, faded but clean, and clutched a rag doll to her chest. The doll had button eyes and yarn hair and a dress that matched Lily's. "Hello," Grace said gently. "I'm Grace. You must be Lily. Did you know my mama?" The question was so direct, so innocent, that it took Grace's breath away. "No, sweetheart, I didn't. I'm sorry. She died when I was born. Papa says she was beautiful and kind, and she would have loved me very much." "I'm sure she would have. I'm sure she did love you, even if she couldn't stay." Lily took a few steps into the kitchen, hugging her doll tighter. "Are you going to be my new mama? Mrs. Henderson said Papa should find me a new mama. She said it's not natural for a man to raise a girl alone." Grace's heart clenched. She knelt down to the child's level, meeting those serious gray eyes. "No, honey, I'm not here to be anyone's mama. I'm just here to cook for your papa's cowboys, just for a little while, until roundup season is over." "Oh." Lily's face fell with such obvious disappointment that Grace had to resist the urge to pull her into a hug. "I thought maybe Papa finally decided to get me a mama. All the other children at school have mamas. I'm the only one who doesn't." "Your papa loved your mama very much," Grace said softly. "Sometimes when people love someone that big, that deep, it's very hard to think about loving anyone else the same way. But don't you think he gets lonely?" "I think everyone gets lonely sometimes, even papas." Lily considered this with the seriousness only children possess. "Do you have a papa?" "I did once. He died when I was not much older than you. Do you have a mama?" "She died too." Lily's eyes widened with recognition. "Then we're the same. We both don't have mamas anymore." Grace's throat tightened painfully. "Yes, sweetheart, we're the same in that way." The kitchen door opened again. Cole stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Lily? Bedtime." "But Papa, I'm talking to Miss Grace." "Now, Lily." The child sighed with all the dramatic flair of a 6-year-old being unjustly persecuted. But she obeyed, crossing to her father and taking his offered hand. Before she left, she turned back to Grace. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" "Yes," Grace said. "I'll be here." "Good. I like you." Then she was gone, towed along by her father's long strides. Grace stood slowly, her knees protesting from kneeling on the hard floor. Through the window, She could see Cole and Lily crossing the yard toward the main house, the little girl chattering up at her father, who listened with the patience of a man who'd heard it all before but would listen anyway. That little girl wanted a mother so desperately, and Cole clearly had no intention of providing one. Grace finished cleaning and made her way back to the bunkhouse loft. She lay on her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. Horses moving in their stalls, the low murmur of cowboys talking on the bunkhouse porch. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon. Tomorrow roundup would officially begin. The real work would start. She needed rest. She was drifting toward sleep when shouting erupted from outside. Grace sat bolt upright, heart hammering, crossed to her window. In the silver moonlight, she could see a rider approaching the ranch at a gallop, horse and man silhouetted against the starry sky. Even from this distance, even in the darkness, Grace recognized him. Vernon Blackwood had found her. Grace scrambled down from the bunkhouse loft, her bare feet hitting the rough wooden floor with a thud that sent splinters into her skin. She didn't care. Through the window, she'd seen Vernon Blackwood riding hard toward the ranch house, and every instinct screamed at her to run, hide, disappear into the darkness like smoke. But she'd promised herself, no more running. By the time she reached the bunkhouse door, cowboys were already spilling out into the moonlit yard. Silas emerged first, suspenders hanging loose over his undershirt, but his gun belt strapped on tight. Tom followed, then Miguel, then the others, all armed, all alert. These were men who'd spent their lives in country where danger came sudden, and you survived by being ready. Cole stood on his porch, rifle cradled in the crook of his arm like it was part of his body. The lamplight from inside the house threw his shadow long across the yard. He looked carved from stone, utterly still except for his eyes, tracking Vernon's approach. Vernon reined his horse to a hard stop 20 feet from the porch, the animal's hooves throwing up dust that hung silver in the moonlight. His face was twisted with rage, veins standing out on his forehead, spit flying as he shouted, "That's my wife you've got hiding in there, Brennan." Cole's voice came back cold and level. "I've got a cook, nothing more. She signed a contract. She owes me $200 for the train ticket and 3 weeks' room and board. She's legally bound to me, and I want her back. Show me the contract." Vernon yanked a folded paper from inside his coat and threw it on the ground between them. Cole descended the porch steps with deliberate slowness, picked up the paper, unfolded it, held it up to the light spilling from his doorway. Grace watched from the shadows near the bunkhouse, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Cole studied the document for a long moment. Then he looked up at Vernon. "This signature's forged. Grace Whitmore never signed this." "The hell she didn't. She came to me willingly in Omaha, said she wanted to be my bride. Then 3 weeks later she steals my money and runs off like a common thief." "That's a lie," Grace heard herself say. The words came out stronger than she felt. She stepped into the moonlight, forcing her legs to carry her forward, even though every muscle wanted to flee. "I never went with you willingly. You told me you were Mr. Brennan's associate. You kidnapped me." Vernon's eyes found her, and his face contorted into something ugly and triumphant. "There she is! There's the lying whore who robbed me." "Watch your mouth." Cole's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You're on my land. You'll speak with respect, or you'll leave with broken teeth." Vernon's hand moved toward the gun at his hip. Instantly, every cowboy in the yard had a weapon pointed at him. The metallic click of hammers being pulled back echoed through the night air. Vernon froze, his hand hovering over his holster, suddenly aware he was outnumbered 10-1. "I wouldn't," Silas said quietly from the shadows. His revolver gleamed dully in the moonlight. "Not unless you want to find out if you're faster than all of us combined." Vernon's hand slowly moved away from his gun, but his eyes stayed locked on Grace with pure hatred. "This isn't over. That woman owes me money. I'll get the sheriff involved. I'll take this to the territorial court if I have to." She signed a contract. "A forged contract," Cole said. "And while you're explaining that to Sheriff Porter, maybe you can explain the 3 graves behind your house, the ones with no names. The ones Grace saw while you were keeping her locked in a room for 3 weeks." The change in Vernon's expression was instantaneous. The rage drained away, replaced by something colder and more calculating. "You've been on my property?" "Haven't needed to. Grace told me about them. Seems to me the sheriff might be interested in doing some investigating. Might want to know what happened to those women. Might want to know about your first wife, Mary, about how she really died." Vernon was silent for a long moment, his horse shifting nervously beneath him. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its bluster. "You're making a mistake, Brennan. Protecting a thief and a liar, it'll come back on you. She'll rob you blind and run off, just like she did to me. Women like her, they're nothing but trouble." "Maybe," Cole said. "But that's my problem, not yours. Now get off my land before I decide you're trespassing and handle it accordingly." Vernon stared at Grace for another long moment. The hatred in his eyes promised retribution, revenge, suffering. Then he yanked his horse's head around and spurred the animal hard. They disappeared into the darkness at a gallop, dust rising like ghosts in their wake. Nobody moved for a full minute after Vernon vanished. Then Silas let out a long breath and lowered his revolver. "Well, that was exciting." "He'll be back," Cole said quietly. "Men like Vernon don't let go easy. He'll find another way to make trouble." "Should we post a watch?" Miguel asked. His English carried the musical lilt of his Mexican heritage. "In case he comes back tonight?" "Good idea. Miguel, you and Tom take first shift. Marcus and Luke, you're second. 4-hour rotations." Cole finally looked at Grace. His expression was unreadable. "Miss Whitmore, my office, now." Grace's stomach dropped. She followed Cole into the house, through a parlor furnished simply with a worn sofa and chairs, down a hallway to a room lined with shelves, account books, ledgers, a desk piled with papers. Cole lit a lamp and closed the door behind them. For a moment he just stood there, looking at her. Grace forced herself to meet his eyes, even though she felt exposed, vulnerable, like a rabbit under a hawk's shadow. "Tell me everything," Cole said finally, "from the beginning. No lies, no omissions. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." So Grace told him, all of it. Boston and the debt collectors, her mother's suicide, the advertisements for mail-order brides, Cole's letter offering honest work instead of marriage, the train journey west, Vernon intercepting her in Omaha with his lies and his forged papers, the 3 weeks of hell in that locked room, Jacob helping her escape, the 2-day walk to Cedar Ridge with nothing but 9 cents and Cole's letter. She told him about the graves, about the things Jacob had said, about Vernon's other victims who disappeared without trace. Cole listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally he moved to the window, looking out at the dark ranch. "I believe you," he said. Grace felt something unknot in her chest. "You do?" "I've known Vernon Blackwood for 5 years. He's a card sharp, a liar, and probably a killer. Sheriffs suspected him of wrongdoing for years, but could never prove anything. If he's escalated to kidnapping mail-order brides, forging contracts, keeping them prisoner," Cole shook his head, "that needs to stop. And those graves need investigating. His son Jacob knows the truth. He'd testify, I think, if someone could protect him from his father. That's a conversation for Sheriff Porter." Cole turned back to face her. "But Grace, you need to understand something. Vernon's not going to give up. He'll go to the sheriff and file a complaint. He'll claim you stole from him. He'll make your life hell, trying to get revenge. And as long as you're on my ranch, that trouble follows you here, affects my men, affects my daughter." Grace's heart sank. "You want me to leave?" "I'm saying you need to know what you're choosing. You can leave now. I'll give you the $40 I promised. I'll arrange safe passage to Denver or San Francisco or wherever you want to go. You can start fresh somewhere. Vernon will never find you. Or you stay. You work roundup. You prove Vernon's claims are false. You help put him in prison where he belongs. But that means standing your ground. No running. No backing down when things get hard." Grace thought about the graves behind Vernon's house, about the women who'd had no one to speak for them, no one to demand justice, about Jacob, that sad-eyed boy who'd saved her life at risk to his own. "I'm staying," she said. "I'm not running anymore." Something shifted in Cole's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition of something kindred. "Then we do this right. Tomorrow morning, you and I go to town, talk to Sheriff Porter, file a formal complaint, get everything on record. Then we prepare for whatever Vernon does next." "Thank you," Grace said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. This could get ugly before it gets better." The next morning, Grace rode to Cedar Ridge in Cole's wagon, sitting stiffly on the bench seat beside him while the ranch hands stared. Cole said nothing during the hour-long journey, his attention focused on the road and the two horses pulling them. Grace watched the landscape roll by, grassland and distant mountains, hawks circling in the endless sky. Cedar Ridge looked different in full daylight, still dusty, still rough, but more alive. People moved along the boardwalks, wagons clustered outside the general store. The saloons were quiet this early, but the smell of last night's whiskey still hung in the air. Cole pulled the wagon to a stop outside a small building with a sign that read, "Sheriff." He helped Grace down, his hand on her elbow courteous but impersonal, then led her inside. Sheriff Hank Porter was a big man gone soft in the middle, with iron-gray hair and a face like weathered saddle leather. He looked up from his desk when they entered, his eyes moving between Cole and Grace with sharp intelligence. "Cole, what brings you to town on a workday?" "Need to file a complaint, Hank. This is Grace Whitmore. She's got a story you need to hear." For the next hour, Grace repeated everything she'd told Cole the night before. The sheriff listened, occasionally asking questions, his expression growing darker as she described the locked room, the forged contract, the graves. When she finished, Porter sat back in his chair. "That's serious accusations, Miss Whitmore. You understand if I investigate this, it's going to stir up trouble? Vernon will fight back. He'll claim you're lying." "I know. You willing to testify in court if it comes to that?" "Yes." Porter looked at Cole. "You believe her?" "I do. And I think if you dig into those graves, you'll find evidence. Maybe 3 women who were reported missing over the years. Maybe marriage contracts that look suspicious. Vernon's been getting away with this too long. I'll ride out to his place today, have a look around. If I find what you're describing, I'll bring Vernon in for questioning." Porter turned back to Grace. "But, miss, you need to be prepared. Even if I arrest him, he might make bail. He's got some money saved from his card games. He could be back on the street within days." "I'll be at Broken Creek Ranch," Grace said. "Mr. Brennan's offered me protection." "Good. Cole runs a tight operation. You'll be safe there." Porter stood, extending his hand to Cole. "I'll keep you informed. This might take time, but I'll get to the truth." They left the sheriff's office and walked back toward the wagon. Grace felt lighter somehow, like speaking the truth out loud had loosened chains she hadn't known she was carrying. They were passing the general store when a woman's voice called out, "Cole Brennan! Is that you?" Cole turned. A woman in her 30s approached, wearing a practical brown dress and carrying a doctor's bag. She had intelligent eyes and capable hands and the no-nonsense air of someone who'd seen too much suffering to tolerate fools. "Dr. Reed," Cole said with something that might have been warmth, "didn't know you were in town. Just finished checking on the Henderson baby. Colic." The mother was beside herself. The woman's eyes moved to Grace with obvious curiosity. "And who's this?" "Grace Whitmore, my new cook for roundup season." "Grace, this is Dr. Abigail Reed. She's a veterinarian. Best in the territory." Abigail extended her hand and Grace shook it, feeling the strength in those fingers. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Whitmore. We don't get many new women settling in Cedar Ridge. Most pass through on their way to somewhere else." "I'm hoping to stay," Grace said. "Good. We need more women willing to put down roots." Abigail turned back to Cole. "I heard you've been losing cattle. Mysterious deaths?" Cole's expression darkened. 20 head in the last 3 months. Can't figure out what's killing them. They're healthy one day, dead the next. No signs of disease." I'd like to examine the next one that dies. Might be poison. There's talk of someone using strychnine to sabotage ranchers, trying to buy up land cheap when the owners can't make their mortgages. You think someone's deliberately poisoning my herd? I think it's worth investigating. Call me next time you find a dead cow. I'll come out to Broken Creek and take a look. They parted ways, and Grace climbed back into the wagon. As Cole guided the horses out of town, she thought about what the doctor had said. Someone poisoning cattle. Someone trying to force Cole into financial ruin. "Do you think Vernon's behind the cattle deaths?" she asked. Cole was silent for a moment. "Vernon wants my water rights. My land borders Broken Creek, the only reliable water source for miles. If he could force me to sell, he'd control the water. Could charge other ranchers whatever he wanted for access. It'd make him rich. But you don't think he's smart enough to pull it off? Vernon's a two-bit con man. Poisoning cattle takes planning, patience, knowledge of chemistry. That's not his style." Cole's hands tightened on the reins. "But he might be working with someone. Someone who has more to gain than just water rights." The pieces were starting to fit together in Grace's mind. But before she could voice her thoughts, they crested a hill, and Broken Creek Ranch came into view. Something was wrong. Smoke rose from the main barn in thick black columns. Cowboys ran back and forth with buckets, shouting. Horses screamed from inside the burning structure, the sound high and terrible. Cole didn't say a word. He just snapped the reins and sent the wagon racing toward the ranch at a speed that had Grace gripping the seat to keep from being thrown. They hit the yard at full gallop, and Cole was off the wagon before it stopped moving, running toward the barn. Grace jumped down and ran after him. The heat hit her like a physical wall. Flames licked through gaps in the barn walls, feeding on dry timber and hay. Inside, horses shrieked in terror. "How many are still in there?" Cole shouted at Silas. "6. We got the rest out, but the back stalls are blocked." Cole stripped off his jacket and soaked it in the water trough, wrapped it around his head and shoulders, started toward the barn entrance. Silas grabbed his arm. "Boss, you can't. The roof's about to go." Cole shook him off. "Those are my horses. I'm not leaving them to burn." He disappeared into the smoke and flames. Grace's heart stopped. Without thinking, she grabbed a bucket, filled it from the trough, and followed the human chain of cowboys passing water toward the fire. Tom was there, his young face blackened with soot. Miguel worked beside him. Luke hauled water with desperate strength. Minutes felt like hours. The barn groaned, timber cracking. Any second the roof would collapse, and Cole would be trapped inside. Then he emerged from the smoke, leading a terrified mare by her halter. Behind her came another horse, then another, 6 in total, all wild-eyed and trembling but alive. Cole released the last one and staggered away from the barn, coughing violently, his face black with soot and his hands raw. With a sound like thunder, the barn roof collapsed inward. Flames shot 30 feet into the air. The cowboys jumped back, abandoning any hope of saving the structure. All they could do now was keep the fire from spreading to other buildings. Grace found Cole on his knees by the water trough, gasping for air. She grabbed a clean cloth, soaked it, and pressed it to his face. He took it without looking at her, wiping soot and ash from his eyes. "Stupid," he rasped. "Could have been killed." "You saved 6 horses," Grace said. "That's not stupid. That's brave. Brave and stupid aren't mutually exclusive." It took another 2 hours to get the fire under control. By then, the barn was nothing but smoking ruins. The horses stood in the corral, still spooked, still trembling. Cowboys sat exhausted on the ground, faces black, hands blistered. When the last ember was doused, Cole gathered everyone in the yard. His face was grim. "This wasn't an accident," he said. "Barns don't just catch fire in broad daylight. Someone set this deliberately." "Vernon," Luke said. The name came out like a curse. Maybe, or maybe someone who wants to look like Vernon. Either way, we're at war now. Whoever's behind this, they're trying to break us, burn us out, force me to sell. Cole looked at each man in turn. "I won't blame anyone who wants to leave. This job just got more dangerous than any of you signed on for." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Silas stepped forward. "I've worked for you 12 years, Cole, through drought and blizzard and market crashes. I'm not quitting because some coward likes matches." One by one, the other cowboys nodded agreement. Even young Tom, barely old enough to shave, stood straighter and said, "I'm staying, boss." Cole's jaw tightened with emotion he didn't voice. "All right then. We rebuild. Miguel, Tom, you're on night watch. 2-man teams, 4-hour shifts, until we catch whoever's doing this. Everyone else, we start roundup tomorrow as planned. We don't let this stop us." The men dispersed, heading to the bunkhouse to clean up and rest. Grace started toward the kitchen, already planning a big dinner to restore their strength. But Cole's voice stopped her. "Miss Whitmore, a word." She turned. Cole stood amid the smoking ruins of his barn, looking older than his years, tired, worn down by responsibility and loss. "You followed me into that fire," he said quietly. "I passed water. That's all. You could have stayed safe, could have watched from a distance. Instead, you joined the bucket line without being asked." He paused. "Thank you." It was the first time he'd thanked her for anything, the first time he'd acknowledged her as something more than hired help. "You're welcome," Grace said. That night, Grace cooked enough food for an army. Roast beef from an animal they'd butchered that afternoon, potatoes fried in fat, biscuits with butter and honey, apple pie made from dried fruit. The cowboys ate like they were starving, and maybe they were. Physical exhaustion and fear burned calories fast. Lily appeared during dinner, escorted by Silas. The little girl had been at the Henderson ranch during the fire, safe from danger, but now her eyes were wide with worry. "Papa says the barn burned down. He says bad men did it." "That's right, little one," Silas said gently, "but your papa and all these good men fought the fire, saved all the horses. Everything's going to be fine." Lily looked around at the soot-stained faces, the bandaged hands, the exhaustion in every line of every body. Then she walked to Cole and climbed into his lap, wrapping her thin arms around his neck. "I was scared, Papa. Mrs. Henderson said you might get hurt." Cole held his daughter close, his eyes closing. "I'm all right, sweetheart, I'm all right." Grace turned away, giving them privacy. But she felt something crack open in her chest. This was what Vernon's games had brought too. A child terrified of losing her only parent, men risking their lives to save animals. A good man pushed to the edge of endurance. After dinner, Grace cleaned up while the first watch took their positions. The ranch felt different at night now, tense, alert, like an animal sensing predators in the darkness. She was scrubbing the last pot when the kitchen door opened. Cole entered, his hair damp from washing, his hands bandaged. He looked at the clean kitchen, the food stored away, everything in order. "You didn't have to stay up this late," he said. "Neither did you. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about what might have happened if we'd been 5 minutes later getting back from town. But you weren't. You were exactly when you needed to be." Cole pulled out a chair and sat, wincing slightly. Burns, probably, though he'd never admit it. Grace poured him coffee without asking, set the cup in front of him. "My wife Sarah used to do that," he said quietly. "Know what I needed before I asked." It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife directly to Grace. She sat down across from him, cradling her own cup. "How long were you married?" 4 years. Met her in Denver when I was buying breeding stock. She was a school teacher, smart, kind. Too good for a rough cattleman like me." His mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "But she saw something in me worth taking a chance on. Came out here to the middle of nowhere. Never complained, even when winters got hard and money got tight." What was she like? Patient, gentle. She could calm a spooked horse with just her voice, could make me laugh when I was ready to give up. Cole stared into his coffee. When she got pregnant, she was so happy. Used to talk to the baby all the time, made plans for the future. Then the labor started early, middle of a February blizzard. By the time I got through the snow to fetch the doctor, it was too late. Sarah bled out in our bed. Lily was born alive, but Sarah... He stopped. swallowed hard. I killed her. By bringing her to this harsh place. By getting her pregnant. By not being able to save her. You didn't kill her, Grace said firmly. Childbirth is dangerous. Women die in cities with doctors right there. It wasn't your fault. I've been telling myself that for 7 years. Still doesn't feel true. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Grace spoke softly. I understand guilt, Mr. Brennan. I understand blaming yourself for things beyond your control. My father died because of debts he couldn't pay. My mother killed herself because she couldn't face life without him. I was there. I could have stopped her if I'd seen the signs, could have talked her out of it, but I was too wrapped up in my own grief to notice hers. Cole looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. How old were you? 21, old enough to know better, old enough to be drowning in your own pain. You can't save someone who's already made up their mind to die, Grace. I've learned that the hard way. The use of her first name sent a strange warmth through her chest, like a door opening, like permission granted. Vernon told me I was worthless, Grace said. Told me I should be grateful he'd taken me in, that no one else would want damaged goods. She met Cole's eyes. I started to believe him, started to think maybe I deserved what he did to me. That's what men like him do. They break you down until you can't remember what it felt like to stand tall. You're standing now, Cole said quietly. Stood up to Vernon in front of my whole crew. Followed me into a burning barn. Faced down your fear and kept moving forward. That's not broken. That's steel. Grace felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. I'm trying. Some days I still feel like that locked room is the only real thing. Like this is all a dream I'll wake up from. It's real. You're here. You're safe. Cole's bandaged hand moved across the table, hovering near hers, but not quite touching. I won't let Vernon take you back. I give you my word on that. The kitchen door burst open. Miguel stood there, breathing hard. Boss, you need to see this. They followed him outside. The night watch had gathered near the ruined barn. Tom held a lantern. In its light, Grace could see words painted on the blackened timbers in white paint. Thief, liar, whore. Her stomach turned. Vernon's message was clear. He wanted everyone to know what he thought of her, wanted to poison them against her. That son of a bitch, Luke muttered. Cole's face was carved granite. Paint over it, tonight. I don't want Miss Whitmore seeing those words in the daylight. Already on it, boss, Silas said. He had a brush and a can of black paint in his hands. Grace watched them work, covering Vernon's hatred with darkness. The cowboys moved efficiently, not speaking, just doing what needed to be done, protecting her without being asked. When it was finished, Cole turned to her. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's roundup. We've got 2 months of hard work ahead. Yes, sir, Grace said. But sleep didn't come easy that night. Grace lay in her bunkhouse loft, listening to the sounds of men keeping watch, and thought about everything that had happened. Vernon's rage, the barn burning, Cole's confession about his wife, the feeling of his hand almost touching hers across the kitchen table. She'd come west looking for honest work and independence. Instead, she'd found danger, complexity, and something she couldn't quite name when Cole Brennan looked at her with those winter-gray eyes. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched vast and dark and full of threats. But inside the bunkhouse, surrounded by the breathing of sleeping cowboys, Grace felt something unexpected. She felt like she belonged. Roundup started at dawn. Grace woke to the sound of horses being saddled, men calling to each other, the ranch coming alive with purposeful chaos. She dressed quickly and hurried to the kitchen, starting coffee and breakfast while the sky was still purple with pre-dawn light. The cowboys ate fast and mounted up. Cole sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, easy and confident, despite his bandaged hands. He wore leather chaps over his trousers, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and had a rope coiled at his saddle. We'll be out 3 days gathering strays, he told Grace. Silas and Marcus are staying here to guard the ranch and help with anything you need. Luke's staying too. His horse threw a shoe yesterday. We'll be fine, Grace said. Bring the men back hungry, and I'll have food ready." Cole nodded and wheeled his horse. The crew thundered out of the yard in a cloud of dust, heading toward the far pastures where cattle had scattered during summer grazing. Grace watched them go, then turned to her work. Bread to bake, laundry to wash, mending to finish. A ranch didn't stop functioning just because the men were gone. Lily appeared mid-morning, carrying her rag doll and looking lonely. Mrs. Henderson had returned her that morning and then left to tend her own household. "Papa's gone," the little girl said sadly. "He's always gone during roundup. He'll be back in 3 days," Grace said gently. "Would you like to help me bake bread? I could use an assistant." Lily's face brightened. "Really? You'd let me help?" "Of course. Come here. I'll show you how to knead dough." They spent the morning in the kitchen together. Grace taught Lily to mix ingredients, to work the dough until it was smooth and elastic, to shape loaves for the pan. The child's hands were small but capable. She took the work seriously, her tongue poking out in concentration. "My mama used to bake," Lily said. "Papa told me. He said she made the best cinnamon rolls in Denver." "I bet she did. Would you like to learn how to make cinnamon rolls?" "Could we? Papa would be so happy if I learned something Mama knew." They made cinnamon rolls that afternoon, filling the kitchen with the scent of butter and sugar and spice. When the rolls came out of the oven, golden and perfect, Lily clapped her hands with delight. "Wait until Papa sees. He's going to be so surprised." Grace helped her wrap several rolls in a clean cloth. "We'll save these for when he gets back. They'll be our secret surprise." Over the next 2 days, Lily became Grace's shadow. The first morning, she appeared in the kitchen doorway at dawn, still in her nightgown, clutching her rag doll. "Can I help?" Her voice was small, uncertain, like she expected rejection. Grace smiled. "Of course, come here. I'll teach you to make biscuits." Lily's hands were too small to knead the dough properly at first. She pressed and pushed with all her 6-year-old strength, flour dusting her nose and cheeks. The dough stuck to her fingers, refusing to cooperate. "It's not working." Frustration made her voice crack. Grace knelt beside her. "Here, watch my hands. You're pushing too hard." Biscuits need gentle hands, firm but kind, like this. She guided Lily's small hands through the motion. Press, fold, turn, press, fold, turn. The rhythm of it, the simple repetition, seemed to calm something in the child. After several minutes, Lily was doing it alone, her tongue poking out in concentration. "I'm doing it, Miss Grace, look. I'm making biscuits just like Mama used to." When the biscuits came out of the oven, golden and perfect, Lily stared at them like they were made of gold. She'd created something good, something that would have made her mother proud. That afternoon they made cinnamon rolls together. Grace showed Lily how to roll the dough thin, spread butter and cinnamon sugar, roll it tight. How to cut the rolls with thread instead of a knife so they kept their shape. "Why does Papa never bake?" Lily asked as they worked. "Because baking takes patience and gentleness. Your Papa's better at things that require strength. But you, Lily, you have both. You're going to be an excellent baker." Lily glowed under the praise. For 2 days, she worked beside Grace like a tiny apprentice, learning to crack eggs without getting shell in the bowl, learning to tell when bread dough had risen enough, learning that women's work wasn't lesser work, just different work, work that required skill and knowledge and art. By the 3rd evening, Lily could make biscuits almost as well as Grace, and more importantly, she'd found something that connected her to the mother she'd never known. She chattered constantly, filling the quiet ranch with stories about school, about her friend Emma Henderson, about the books her father read to her at night. Grace found herself falling in love with this lonely little girl who just wanted a mother, found herself imagining what it would be like to be that for her, to braid her hair every morning, to teach her reading and sewing and all the things mothers pass to daughters. But Cole had been clear. He'd hired a cook, nothing more. On the 3rd evening, the crew returned, dusty, exhausted, but triumphant. They'd gathered 200 head of cattle, Cole reported, Fewer than last year, but enough to make the drive to market viable. Grace had dinner ready, beef stew with vegetables, fresh bread, the cinnamon rolls Lily had helped make. The cowboys attacked the food like starving wolves. Cole ate more slowly, savoring each bite like a man who'd survived on jerky and hardtack for 3 days. When he bit into a cinnamon roll, he stopped, looked up at Grace. "This tastes like—" "Lily helped me make them," Grace said quickly. "She said your wife used to bake these. We thought you might like some." Cole's eyes found his daughter, who was watching him nervously. "Did you make these, Lily girl?" "Miss Grace taught me. Just like Mama used to make." Cole's face did something complicated, softened and hurt at the same time. He held out his arm, and Lily ran to him, climbing into his lap. "They're perfect," he said roughly. "Your Mama would be so proud." After dinner, after the dishes were done, after Lily had been tucked into bed, Grace found Cole on the porch. He was staring out at the dark ranch, a cinnamon roll in his hand. "Thank you," he said without turning, "for teaching her that. For giving her something of her mother. It was Lily's idea. She misses Sarah terribly. I know, I don't know how to be both parents. Don't know how to give her what a mother would." Grace moved to stand beside him, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "You're doing better than you think. She adores you. Talks about you constantly. You're her whole world. That's the problem. I'm all she has. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you." "You don't know that. Not with Vernon out there. Not with someone burning barns and poisoning cattle." Cole finally looked at her. "I need to ask you something, Grace. If something did happen to me, would you look after Lily? Just until family could come get her. My brother's in Denver. He'd take her. But the journey takes time, and she'd need someone in between." The request caught Grace off guard. "You trust me with your daughter? I've watched you with her these past days. You're good with her, patient, kind. She likes you. That's rare. Lily doesn't warm up to people easy." "Of course I'd look after her," Grace said. "But nothing's going to happen to you, Cole. You're too stubborn to die." His mouth quirked. "Stubborn, that's one word for it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Cole spoke again. "I'm starting to think you're not the person I thought you were when you first showed up. What did you think I was? A con artist, a liar, someone working with Vernon to get close to me?" He shook his head. "I was wrong. You're just a woman trying to survive, trying to build something better. I respect that." "Thank you," Grace said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. The hard part's still coming. Vernon's not done. And whoever's behind the cattle poisoning, they're not done either. This ranch is under siege, and you're caught in the middle of it. I can handle it. I'm starting to believe you can." The next morning brought visitors. Sheriff Porter rode in with 2 deputies, looking grim. Grace's heart sank when she saw them. Bad news traveled on horses like that. Cole met them in the yard. "Hank, what's wrong?" "Went out to Blackwood's place like you asked. Dug up those graves." Porter's face was stone. "Found 3 bodies. All women. All showing signs of violent death. One was definitely Mary Blackwood. The other 2 matched descriptions of mail-order brides who went missing in '82 and '84. Grace felt sick. She'd known about the graves, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way nothing else had. "Where's Vernon?" Cole asked. "That's the problem. He's gone. Place was deserted. Looks like he cleared out fast. Took his son, took whatever valuables he had, disappeared. He's running. Yep, and I've got warrants out for his arrest in 3 territories. Murder, kidnapping, fraud. When we catch him, he'll hang." Porter looked at Grace. "You'll need to testify eventually, Miss Whitmore, when we bring him to trial." "I will," Grace said. "Whatever it takes." After the sheriff left, Grace felt strangely empty. Vernon was gone, which meant she was safe. But it also meant he was out there somewhere, free, possibly planning revenge. The threat hadn't ended. It had just gone underground. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Vernon's rage, his promise of retribution, the way he'd looked at her with pure hatred. Around midnight, she gave up on rest and climbed down from the loft. The ranch was quiet except for the night watch. Grace walked toward the kitchen, thinking she'd make tea, maybe read one of the books Cole kept in his office. She was crossing the yard when she heard a sound. A footstep. Behind her. Grace spun around. Vernon Blackwood stood 10 feet away, a gun in his hand, his face twisted with madness. "You destroyed me," he hissed. "Turned everyone against me. Got the law after me. Now I'm going to destroy you." Grace opened her mouth to scream, but Vernon lunged forward, clamping a hand over her face. "Make a sound and I'll shoot every man in that bunkhouse. Starting with the young one. Tom, isn't it? He your favorite?" Grace went still. Vernon dragged her backward toward the trees at the edge of the property, his gun pressed against her ribs. Her mind raced. The night watch was on the far side of the ranch. No one would see, no one would hear. They reached the tree line and Vernon shoved her hard. Grace fell, her hands hitting dirt and rocks. She rolled, trying to get to her feet, but Vernon was on her, his weight pinning her down. "Thought you were so smart," he panted. "Thought you could escape me. But you're mine. You'll always be mine." His hands closed around her throat. Grace clawed at his face, his arms, but he was too strong. Black spots danced across her vision. Her lungs screamed for air. Then Vernon's weight was suddenly gone. Grace gasped, rolling onto her side, coughing and choking. Through tears, she saw Cole wrestling Vernon to the ground. They fought in silence, brutal and efficient, two men who knew how to kill. Cole got Vernon in a headlock. "You done?" he growled. "Or do I need to break your neck?" Vernon went limp. Cole held him another moment, then released him carefully. Vernon collapsed onto the ground, breathing hard. "Luke!" Cole shouted. "Get the sheriff, now!" Luke appeared from the shadows, already mounted. He galloped toward town at full speed. Cole helped Grace to her feet. "You all right?" Grace nodded, unable to speak. Her throat felt crushed. Cole's arm went around her shoulders, supporting her weight. "How did you know?" she finally managed. "Couldn't sleep. Saw you leave the bunkhouse, then I saw him." Cole's voice was hard. "He's done, Grace. This time, he's really done." Sheriff Porter arrived within the hour. He took one look at the bruises forming on Grace's throat and Vernon's battered face and shook his head. "Murder, attempted murder. That's 2 hangings worth right there." They led Vernon away in chains. He didn't struggle, didn't speak, just stared at Grace with empty eyes. As the sheriff's men lifted Vernon into the wagon, he finally spoke. His voice was hoarse from Cole's chokehold, but still carried venom. "You think this is over?" He looked directly at Grace. "You think putting me in a cell changes anything? I own you. Signed contract says so. And even if I hang, there's others who'll remember. Others who know what you are. A thief, a whore, a liar." Sheriff Porter backhanded Vernon across the mouth. "Shut up before I gag you." Vernon spat blood onto the wagon bed, but his eyes stayed locked on Grace, promising retribution even from the grave. As the wagon pulled away, he shouted one last thing. "You'll never be free of me. Never." Grace stood frozen, his words echoing in her mind. Cole's arm came around her shoulders, solid and warm. "He's wrong," Cole said quietly. "You're already free. He just doesn't know it yet." But Grace wondered. Even with Vernon in chains, even with the threat seemingly eliminated, she could still feel his fingers around her throat, could still hear his voice telling her she was nothing. Freedom, she was learning, wasn't just physical. It was mental, emotional. And some chains took longer to break than others. She watched the wagon disappear into the darkness, carrying the man who'd tried to destroy her. Tomorrow, he'd face justice. But tonight, Grace would still check the locks on the bunkhouse door, would still wake at every sound, would still carry the fear he'd planted deep in her bones. Real freedom, she realized, would take time. But at least now she had time. And safety, and people who'd proven they'd fight for her. That was a start. When the sheriff's wagon disappeared into the night, Grace finally let herself shake. The fear and adrenaline drained out all at once, leaving her hollow. Cole guided her to the porch, made her sit, brought her water, sat beside her in the darkness. "It's over now," he said quietly. "He's going to hang. He can't hurt you anymore." "I know," Grace whispered. "So why do I still feel afraid?" "Because fear doesn't die as fast as we want it to. It lingers, takes time to fade." Cole's hand found hers in the darkness. "But every day it'll get a little smaller. Every day you'll remember you're stronger than he ever was." They sat together as dawn approached, two people who'd survived their own kinds of hell, finding something unexpected in the quiet Wyoming morning. Understanding, respect, and the first fragile threads of something that might, given time, become trust. The trial of Vernon Blackwood lasted 3 days in Cheyenne and drew crowds from across Wyoming territory. Grace sat in the witness box on the second day, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. This was the biggest trial Cheyenne had seen in years. The prosecutor, a stern man named Morrison, led her through her testimony with gentle efficiency. "Miss Whitmore, please tell the court how you came to be at Vernon Blackwood's homestead." Grace spoke clearly, forcing herself to look at the jury, not at Vernon. She described the letters from Cole Brennan, the train journey, Vernon intercepting her in Omaha with his lies about being Cole's associate. "And when you arrived at the defendant's property, what happened?" "He showed me a marriage contract, said I'd signed it. But I'd never seen that document before. The signature looked like mine, but I would have remembered signing something so binding." Vernon's lawyer, a thin, nervous man from Denver, shot to his feet during cross-examination. "Miss Whitmore, isn't it true that you were desperate? A woman alone with no prospects? Isn't it possible you agreed to marry my client and then had second thoughts?" "No, sir. I agreed to work for Cole Brennan as a cook. I never agreed to marry anyone." "But you admit you were corresponding with men through mail-order bride advertisements?" "I wrote to 5 men inquiring about work opportunities. Only Mr. Brennan replied with a job offer instead of a marriage proposal. That's why I chose him." The lawyer paced, his voice taking on a sneering quality. "Convenient story. A woman shows up claiming kidnapping, but there's a signed contract saying otherwise. How do we know you didn't sign it and then regret your decision?" Grace met his eyes steadily. "Because if I'd willingly married Vernon Blackwood, I wouldn't have scars on my wrists from being tied to a bedpost. I wouldn't have bruises shaped like fingerprints on my throat. And I wouldn't have spent 3 weeks locked in a room, eating scraps like a dog, while he told me about the other women who'd come before me, the ones buried in graves behind his house." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel for order. When the prosecutor produced the forged contract, he had a handwriting expert testify. The man pointed out subtle differences in the signature. The way Grace formed her capital W, the slant of her letters. Vernon had done a good job, but not perfect. "This signature is definitely forged," the expert concluded, "by someone who had access to Miss Whitmore's actual handwriting, likely from her correspondence with Mr. Cole Brennan." The evidence mounted. The 3 bodies exhumed from Vernon's property. Medical examiner testimony about broken bones and signs of violence. Jacob's diary entries describing his mother's screams. Letters from families of missing women whose descriptions matched the remains found. By the 3rd day, Vernon's lawyer had stopped trying. The case was unwinnable. The courtroom was silent except for her words. Women in the gallery wept. Men's faces hardened with rage. Vernon sat at the defense table, shackled and sullen. His lawyer, a thin man from Denver with nervous hands, tried to paint Grace as a woman scorned, a liar seeking revenge for a romance gone wrong. But when the prosecution produced the forged marriage contract, the evidence from the 3 graves, and testimony from Jacob Blackwood himself, the case collapsed like a house built on sand. Jacob took the stand on the 3rd day. He was 14 but looked older, his face carved by things no child should witness. He spoke quietly but clearly about finding his mother's diary, about the screams he'd heard the night she died, about the other women who'd come and gone from his father's homestead, their belongings burned, their names forgotten. "My pa told me they left," Jacob said, his voice breaking. "Said they got tired of ranch life and moved on. But I knew. I always knew." The jury deliberated for 20 minutes. When they returned, the foreman stood and pronounced Vernon Blackwood guilty on 3 counts of murder, 1 count of kidnapping, and 2 counts of fraud. The judge sentenced him to hang within the month. Grace expected to feel triumph when the sentence was read, expected satisfaction, vindication, the sweet taste of justice served. Instead, she felt hollow. Vernon Blackwood would hang, the man who'd terrorized her, who'd killed 3 women before her, who'd tried to own her like property. He'd die for his crimes, but his death wouldn't bring back Mary Blackwood, wouldn't bring back the 2 other women whose names were still unknown, whose families might never know what happened to them. Justice wasn't the same as healing. Punishment wasn't the same as peace. Outside the courthouse, Grace stood in the September sunshine and tried to make sense of what she felt. Relief, yes. Safety, definitely. But also sadness for the lives Vernon had destroyed, for Jacob, who'd lost both parents to violence, for the women who'd never escaped, never got to stand in a courtroom and speak their truth. "You all right?" Cole asked quietly. "I don't know what I feel," Grace admitted. "I thought I'd be happy, thought I'd feel free, but I just feel tired." "That's normal. You've been carrying this weight for months. Now it's done. There's an emptiness where the fear used to be. Takes time to figure out what to fill that space with." Grace leaned against him, grateful for his steadiness. "I keep thinking about the other women, the ones who didn't make it, who never got to see him face justice. You did more than survive, Grace. You made sure their deaths weren't forgotten, made sure their killer paid. That matters." "Does it?" "It does, to their families, to any woman Vernon might have hurt in the future. You stopped him. That's not nothing." Grace supposed he was right, but it still felt strange, anticlimactic, like the ending of a story that should have been more satisfying. Maybe that was the difference between justice and revenge. Revenge would have felt good in the moment. Justice just felt necessary. Right, but not particularly rewarding. She'd take it anyway. Vernon showed no emotion when the sentence was read. He simply stared at Grace with those empty eyes until the bailiff led him away. Outside the courthouse, Grace stood in the September sunshine and felt something unknot in her chest. Cole waited beside her, his hat in his hands, his presence solid and reassuring. "It's really over," she said. "It's over," Cole confirmed. "He can't hurt anyone ever again." "What about Jacob?" "Reverend Pike's taking him in. The boy deserves a chance at a decent life. Pike will see he gets schooling, learns a trade, makes something of himself despite what his father was." Grace nodded, watching as Jacob emerged from the courthouse with the Reverend's hand on his shoulder. The boy caught her eye and gave her a small, sad smile. Grace smiled back. He'd saved her life twice now, once by letting her escape, once by telling the truth. They rode back to Broken Creek Ranch in Cole's wagon, the prairie stretching endlessly around them. The cattle drive was scheduled to start in 2 weeks. After that, Grace's contract would be complete. She'd have her $40. She could go anywhere, do anything. The whole West lay open before her. But leaving Broken Creek felt impossible now. It had become home in ways Boston never had. "What will you do after Roundup?" Cole asked, as if reading her thoughts. "I don't know," Grace admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead. I've been too focused on surviving day to day." "You're a good cook. You could find work at any ranch or boarding house in the territory, maybe even open your own restaurant in Cheyenne or Laramie." "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. "What I want doesn't matter. You came here for honest work and honest pay. I can't ask you to stay beyond what we agreed. What if I wanted to stay? The wagon slowed. Cole pulled the horses to a stop in the middle of the empty prairie. He turned to face Grace, his gray eyes searching hers. Why would you want to stay? You've got your whole life ahead of you, freedom, opportunity. Why would you tie yourself to a failing ranch and a man who can't even keep his barn from burning down? The ranch isn't failing. You're just facing challenges. Every business faces challenges. My cattle are being poisoned, Grace. Someone's trying to destroy me and I can't figure out who or why. Until I solve that, this place isn't safe. You deserve better than living under constant threat. Maybe I'm tired of running towards safety, Grace said. Maybe I want to stand and fight for something that matters. And this ranch matters to you? Grace chose her words carefully. This place gave me a chance when no one else would. You gave me a chance. Lily needs someone who understands what it's like to lose a mother. The men treat me with respect. I have purpose here. Why would I leave that? Cole's hands tightened on the reins. Because staying means dealing with whoever's poisoning the cattle, means more danger, more uncertainty. I can't promise you safety, Grace. Can't even promise the ranch will survive the winter if we keep losing livestock. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for a chance to prove I'm more than just a cook passing through. You've already proved that. Then let me stay. Cole looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Then he nodded once. All right. We'll work out new terms when Roundup's done. Fair wages. Permanent position if that's what you want. That's what I want, Grace said quietly. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a comfortable silence now. An understanding reached without need for more words. When they arrived back at the ranch, Dr. Abigail Reed was waiting in the yard with her medical bag and a grim expression. Beside her lay the carcass of a dead cow, bloated and stiff. Found this one this morning, Silas reported. Same as the others. Healthy yesterday, dead today. Abigail knelt beside the dead cow, her face grave. She lifted one of the animal's eyelids. See this? Pupils are dilated. Classic sign. She pried open the mouth, examining the tongue. Foam residue. The animal was convulsing before death. She pulled a scalpel from her medical bag and made a careful incision in the cow's stomach. The smell that emerged made everyone step back. Abigail didn't flinch. She'd smelled worse. Stomach contents are greenish-black. See this residue? She pointed with the tip of her scalpel. That's characteristic of strychnine. The poison causes violent muscle spasms. The animal dies from exhaustion and asphyxiation as the muscles seize. It's a terrible way to go. She stood, wiping her hands on a cloth. I've seen this before. 3 years ago, someone was poisoning sheep over in Laramie County. Same method. Dissolved strychnine in water, poured it over salt blocks. The animals lick it and ingest fatal doses. How much would it take to kill a full-grown cow? Cole asked. Not much, 2 or 3 grains. You can buy it at any pharmacy for killing rats. But in large quantities? Abigail's expression darkened. Someone spent serious money on this. We're talking dozens of cattle poisoned over months. That's not random. That's systematic. She walked to the salt blocks, examining each one carefully. When she reached the 3rd block, she stopped. Ran her finger over the surface, then sniffed it. This one. See how the surface is darker, slightly damp? Someone dissolved strychnine in water and poured it over the block. When it dries, the poison crystals stay on the surface. Every time a cow licks this, it's dosing itself. How long has this been going on? Silas asked. Abigail calculated. Based on the number of dead cattle and the degradation of this salt block, I'd say someone's been poisoning your herd for at least 3 months, maybe longer. Someone's putting it in the salt licks. Cole's jaw tightened. Show me. They walked to the north pasture where salt blocks were stationed for the cattle. Abigail examined each one carefully, then pointed to a block that looked slightly different from the others. Darker. Damp. This one's been tampered with. See the discoloration? Someone dissolved strychnine in water and poured it over the block. The cattle lick it and ingest the poison. Death comes slow and painful. Who has access to strychnine? Grace asked. Pharmacies sell it for killing rats and vermin, but you need to sign for it. There'll be a record. Abigail stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. I'll check with the pharmacy in Cedar Ridge and Cheyenne, see who's been buying large quantities. It has to be someone who can get onto my land without being noticed, Cole said. Someone who knows where the salt blocks are. Someone with a reason to want me ruined. Vernon's in jail, Silas pointed out. Can't be him. No, but Vernon might have been working with someone with deeper pockets and bigger ambitions. Grace thought about the conversation she'd overheard in town weeks ago. A banker talking about acquiring distressed properties, buying up ranches cheap when owners couldn't make their mortgage payments. Curtis Lang, she said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. The banker from Cheyenne. He's been pressuring you to sell, hasn't he? Kept offering to buy Broken Creek at prices well below market value. Cole's eyes narrowed. He made 3 offers this year alone, each one lower than the last. Said he wanted the land for a client in the East, some railroad speculation. What if there is no client, Grace said. What if Lang wants the land for himself, control the water rights, charge other ranchers for access, make a fortune? Abigail nodded slowly. It fits. Curtis Lang has the money to buy strychnine in bulk, has the education to know how to use it, and he'd have access to your property if he came during the day pretending to conduct bank business. I'm going to kill him, Cole said flatly. You're going to prove it first, Abigail corrected. Then you're going to let the law handle it. Killing a banker gets you hanged, no matter how justified. They developed a plan over the next hour. Abigail would check pharmacy records. Grace would go through the ranch ledgers, looking for any pattern in the cattle deaths. Cole and Silas would set up a night watch specifically on the salt blocks, hoping to catch whoever was poisoning them in the act. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Then on the 4th night, Luke came racing into the yard just after midnight, his horse lathered with sweat. Got him! We got him in the act! Cole, Grace, and half the crew ran to the north pasture. There, held at gunpoint by Miguel and Tom, stood a man in city clothes. Not Curtis Lang himself, but someone Grace recognized from town, a clerk who worked at Lang's bank. Start talking, Cole said, his voice deadly calm. The man, pale and sweating, despite the cool night air, stammered out his confession. Curtis Lang had paid him $50 to poison the cattle, had promised him 100 more when Broken Creek Ranch failed and Lang acquired the property. He's doing it to 4 other ranches too, the clerk babbled. Wants to buy up all the land along the creek, control the water. He's already got investors lined up from back east. Gonna make thousands. Where's Lang now? Cheyenne. At his house on 4th Street. He doesn't know I got caught. Thinks I'm out here doing another round of poisoning. Cole looked at Silas. Get the sheriff. Have him meet us in Cheyenne. We're bringing Lang in tonight. And 2 hours later, they rode into Cheyenne with Sheriff Porter and 3 deputies. Curtis Lang's house was a fine 2-story affair with a manicured lawn, gas lamps on the porch, and the kind of respectability that money could buy, but character couldn't. Sheriff Porter didn't bother knocking. He kicked in the mahogany door, the wood splintering around expensive brass fittings. They flooded inside, boots echoing on marble floors that had been imported from Italy. They found Lang in his study, surrounded by evidence of his crimes. Ledgers lay open on his desk, showing detailed accounting of cattle deaths at 5 different ranches. Maps covered the walls, marking every property along Broken Creek in red ink. Beside them, projected land values after consolidation, triple what the ranchers currently owned. Lang looked up as they entered, his face going pale. He made a desperate grab for papers on his desk, trying to shove them into the fireplace. Cole was faster. He slammed Lang's hand down on the desk, grabbed the papers. They were contracts, pre-written purchase agreements for every ranch Lang had been targeting, all at prices far below market value, all contingent on the ranchers being unable to make their mortgage payments. "This is nothing," Lang stammered. "Just business speculation, not illegal to plan investments." Sheriff Porter picked up one of the ledgers. Read aloud. "Broken Creek Ranch, July 15th, 8 head poisoned. August 3rd, 12 head poisoned. September 10th, 6 head poisoned." He looked at Lang. "Mighty detailed record-keeping for something you had no involvement in. That doesn't prove anything. I could have been tracking losses for potential investment purposes." "Then explain this." Cole pulled a receipt from the desk drawer. "Purchase order for 20 pounds of strychnine from a pharmacy in Denver. Signed by you. Dated 3 months ago." Lang's face went from pale to gray. That's for rats. We have a rat problem at the bank." 20 pounds? Porter's voice dripped skepticism. "That's enough to kill every rat in Wyoming territory twice over." They found more evidence in Lang's safe. Letters to his clerk detailing which ranches to target and when. Payment records showing $50 installments to the clerk for special services rendered. Even a journal where Lang had written out his entire plan in meticulous detail, like a man who couldn't believe his own cleverness. When confronted with the evidence, Lang tried to run, made it to the back door before Cole tackled him, driving him face first into the expensive Persian rug. They went down hard, Lang's expensive suit tearing on Cole's work-roughened hands. Cole hauled him up by his collar. "You poisoned my cattle, tried to destroy everything I built, tried to starve out my family. For what? Money?" "It's just business," Lang gasped. "Nothing personal. The land's more valuable consolidated. You were in the way. You all were." Cole's fist connected with Lang's jaw. The banker crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Sheriff Porter pulled Cole back. "That's enough. We've got him. We've got everything we need." They searched the rest of the house and found ledgers documenting Lang's other schemes. Fraudulent loans to desperate farmers, foreclosures on properties that were then sold to Lang's associates at massive profits. A systematic pattern of financial predation stretching back years. Curtis Lang, respected banker, pillar of Cheyenne society, was revealed as nothing more than a sophisticated thief with expensive tastes and no conscience. Lang tried to run, made it as far as the back door before Cole tackled him. They went down hard, Lang's expensive suit tearing on the floor. Cole hauled him up by his collar, his face inches from the banker's. "You poisoned my cattle, tried to destroy everything I built. For what? Money?" "It's just business," Lang gasped. "Nothing personal. The land's more valuable consolidated. You were in the way." Cole's fist connected with Lang's jaw. The banker crumpled. Sheriff Porter pulled Cole back before he could hit him again. "That's enough. We've got him. We've got the evidence. He'll stand trial same as Vernon did." They hauled Lang away in chains. His clerk had already confessed to everything, signed a statement implicating Lang in the poisoning of cattle at 5 different ranches. The banker would spend years in prison, maybe decades. Back at Broken Creek, as dawn painted the sky pink and gold, Grace stood on the porch and watched Cole unsaddle his horse. He moved slowly, exhausted from the long night. But there was peace in his movements. Relief. "It's really over this time," Grace said when he joined her on the porch. "Both of them gone, Vernon and Lang. All the threats eliminated." Cole sat heavily on the porch steps. "I keep waiting for the next crisis, the next disaster. Can't quite believe we're actually safe." "We are," Grace said. "We can breathe now, build, plan for the future." "Future." Cole said the word like he was testing its weight. "Haven't let myself think about the future in 7 years. Just focused on getting through each day, keeping Lily safe, keeping the ranch afloat." "What would you do if you could think about the future? What would you want?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Grace, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. "I'd want someone to share it with, someone strong enough to handle this life, smart enough to see through trouble before it arrives, kind enough to teach my daughter that women can be gentle and fierce at the same time." He paused. "Someone like you." Grace's heart hammered. "Cole, I know what I said when you arrived. No complications, no romance, just business. But Grace, you've become more than an employee, more than a friend. You've become essential. To this ranch, to Lily, to me." He stood, crossing to stand in front of her. "I'm not good with words, never have been. But I need you to know that if you left now, you'd be taking something vital with you." "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if you'd consider staying permanently, not as a cook, as a partner. Help me run this ranch. Help me raise Lily, build something that lasts." His hand reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm asking if you could see a future here, with us." Grace thought about Boston, about the girl she'd been who'd answered a stranger's letter with desperate hope. That girl had wanted safety, security, a place to belong. She'd found all of that at Broken Creek. But she'd found something more too. She'd found purpose, strength, the courage to stand and fight instead of running away. And she'd found this complicated, damaged, honorable man who looked at her like she was something precious. "I can see a future here," Grace said quietly. "I want a future here. But Cole, I need you to understand something. I'm not Sarah. I can't be her. Can't replace what you lost. I don't want you to be Sarah. I want you to be Grace. Strong, stubborn, brave Grace who followed me into a burning barn and stood up to Vernon Blackwood and saw through Curtis Lang's schemes." His hands cupped her face gently. "I'm not offering you Sarah's place. I'm offering you your own place, beside me, as an equal, as a partner." "As a partner," he confirmed, "in every sense of the word." Grace reached up, covering his hands with hers. "Then yes, I'll stay. I'll build this future with you." Cole's smile was slow and genuine, transforming his stern face into something younger, lighter. He leaned down and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper, as 7 years of loneliness met months of growing trust, and exploded into something neither of them had expected to feel again. When they finally broke apart, the sun was fully risen, painting Broken Creek Ranch in shades of amber and gold. The cattle drive happened 2 weeks later. They moved 200 head to the railhead in Cheyenne, sold them at good prices, paid off debts, and put money aside for winter supplies. The ranch was stable, secure, ready to grow. In November, Cole and Grace were married by Reverend Pike in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Lily stood beside them, holding a bouquet of late-season wildflowers, her face radiant with joy. The cowboys attended in their Sunday best, which mostly meant clean shirts and attempts at taming their hair. Silas gave Grace away, his weathered face creased with pride. Dr. Abigail stood as witness. Even Sheriff Porter attended, tipping his hat to the happy couple. "Do you, Cole Brennan, take this woman to be your wife, to honor and cherish in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Cole said, his eyes never leaving Grace's face. "Do you, Grace Whitmore, take this man to be your husband, to honor and cherish, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Grace thought about the journey that had brought her here, the loss and pain, the fear and uncertainty, the moment she'd stepped off that train with 9 cents and a stranger's letter, and no idea if she'd survive the week. All of it had led to this man, this place, this future she was choosing with open eyes and full heart. "I do," she said. When Cole kissed her, the cowboys cheered. Lily threw wildflowers. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed peacefully, and the wind carried the scent of prairie grass and possibility. The wedding feast lasted until dark. Grace had cooked for days, preparing enough food to feed the crew and half the neighboring ranchers who'd come to celebrate. There was roasted beef and potatoes, fresh bread and butter, 3 kinds of pie. Silas produced a fiddle from somewhere and played, while the younger cowboys danced with visiting ranch daughters. Lily refused to leave Grace's side all evening, clinging to her new mother's hand like she was afraid she might disappear. Grace didn't mind. She understood the fear of loss, the need for reassurance. When the guests finally departed and Lily was tucked into bed, Cole and Grace stood on their porch, looking out at the ranch that was now officially theirs together. "Thank you," Cole said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing past what I was and recognizing what I could be. For giving me a reason to think about tomorrow instead of just surviving today." Grace leaned into his side, his arm coming around her shoulders. "You gave me the same thing. A reason to stop running. A place to call home. This is home now. For both of us. For all of us." In the distance, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Grace thought about the women buried behind Vernon's homestead, the ones who'd had no chance to escape, no voice to speak for them, no justice to claim their names. She'd been so close to joining them. One wrong turn, one moment of different luck, and she'd be lying in an unmarked grave while Vernon moved on to his next victim. But she'd survived. She'd escaped. She'd fought her way to freedom and found something better than safety on the other side. She'd found a life worth living. Winter came hard to Wyoming that year, but Broken Creek Ranch weathered it well. The cattle survived on hay they'd put up during summer. The barn, rebuilt stronger than before, kept the horses warm and dry. The ranch hands stayed through the cold months, grateful for steady work and good food. Grace settled into her role as Cole's wife and Lily's mother with surprising ease. She managed the household accounts, negotiated with suppliers, planned for spring planting. She taught Lily to read and write, to sew and cook, passing on the skills her own mother had taught her. The months after Vernon's execution brought a peace Grace had never known. October and November passed in a blur of cattle sales, winter preparations, and wedding plans. Cole taught her to shoot, insisting she know how to defend herself if danger ever came again. Lily taught her to ride better, the two of them galloping across the prairie laughing like children. By December, Grace realized she'd gone an entire week without thinking about Vernon, then 2 weeks. The nightmares came less frequently. The locked room in her mind grew smaller, less real, until it was just a memory instead of a prison she carried everywhere. Cole noticed the change. "You're lighter," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, "like a weight's been lifted." "It has," Grace admitted. "For the first time since Boston, I feel like I can breathe all the way down. Like the future is something to look forward to instead of something to survive." That night in their bed, they made love with a tenderness born of safety. No fear, no ghosts, just two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins of their pasts. In February, Grace realized she was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She thought about Sarah bleeding out in this very house while giving birth to Lily, about her own mother, who'd survived childbirth only to succumb to grief years later. When she told Cole, his face went white. "We'll get Dr. Reed. She'll stay here the last month. We'll have everything ready. You'll be safe." "Cole," Grace took his hands, steadying him. "I'm scared too, but we can't live in fear of what might happen. We can only prepare the best we can and trust. I can't lose you." "Not after finally finding you." "You won't. I'm stronger than Sarah was, older, healthier, and I have Dr. Reed who knows more about birthing than any frontier doctor. We'll be fine." Through spring and summer, Grace's belly grew. Lily was fascinated by the baby, pressing her ear to Grace's stomach to hear kicks, chattering about being a big sister. The cowboys treated Grace like she was made of glass, rushing to help with any task heavier than stirring soup. Cole was alternately overprotective and terrified. He hardly let Grace out of his sight, made her rest constantly, worried over every twinge and discomfort. "You're going to drive yourself mad before this baby arrives," Grace told him in August, when her patience finally wore thin. "I'm pregnant, not dying. Women have babies every day and survive just fine." Sarah didn't. "I'm not Sarah," Grace said firmly, "and this isn't the same situation. We're prepared. We have help. We have time. Stop treating me like I'm already a ghost." Her words were harsh but necessary. Cole needed to face his fear instead of letting it consume him. The baby came in late September, on a morning when the cottonwood trees were turning gold and the air carried the first hint of winter. Grace woke at dawn with a tightening in her belly. Not pain yet, just pressure. She lay still, counting the seconds until it passed, then rose carefully to start breakfast. Cole was already awake, watching her with worried eyes. Is it time? Maybe. Contractions are far apart still. Could be hours, could be all day. Grace tried to smile. The ranch doesn't stop for babies. The men still need to eat. The men can cook their own damn breakfast. You're going back to bed. The contractions grew stronger through the morning. By noon, Grace couldn't pretend anymore. She gripped the bedpost as another wave of pain rolled through her, breathing hard until it passed. Abigail arrived within the hour, alerted by Silas, who'd ridden to town at full gallop. She examined Grace with practiced efficiency. 4 hours, maybe 5. First babies take their time. Cole paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal. Grace could hear his boots on the porch boards. Back and forth, back and forth. The sound of a man confronting his worst fear. The pain intensified as afternoon wore on. Grace tried to stay quiet, tried to be strong, but when the contractions came one on top of another, with no break between, she heard herself cry out. Cole burst through the door. Is she all right? What's wrong? She's fine. This is normal. Abigail's voice was firm. But Mr. Brennan, you need to leave. You're making her nervous. I'm not leaving her. Grace reached for his hand between contractions. Cole, I need you to trust Dr. Reed. Please, wait outside. I'll be all right. He looked like she'd asked him to cut off his own arm. But he went, his face gray with fear. The worst pain came as the sun touched the western mountains. Grace screamed, couldn't help it, the agony tearing through her like nothing she'd ever experienced. Worse than Vernon's beatings, worse than anything. That's it, Abigail encouraged. Push now, hard as you can. Your baby's almost here. Grace pushed with everything she had. Pushed until black spots danced across her vision. Pushed until she thought she might die from the effort. Then a cry filled the room, high and outraged and completely perfect. It's a boy, Abigail laughed. Grace, you have a son. The baby was placed on Grace's chest, still covered in blood and birthing fluid, squalling with fury at being born. Grace held him, tears streaming down her face, and felt something fundamental shift in her world. This was hers, this life she'd created, this future given form. Cole appeared in the doorway, his face white. Grace? We're fine, she said, her voice hoarse from screaming. We're both fine. Come meet your son. You're doing fine, Abigail said, as Grace gritted her teeth through another contraction. Strong and steady. This baby will be here by sunset. She was right. As the sun touched the western mountains, painting the sky orange and red, Grace brought a son into the world. He came out squalling, healthy, and furious at the indignity of being born. Cole had paced the yard for hours, unable to work, unable to think, unable to do anything but listen for sounds from the house and imagine the worst. Every scream from Grace drove a knife deeper into his chest. He remembered Sarah's screams, remembered how they'd gotten weaker as the hours passed, remembered the terrible silence that had followed. When Abigail finally opened the door and called for him, Cole's legs almost didn't work. He walked toward the house like a man heading to his own execution, certain he'd find Grace dead and himself alone again with another child who'd cost a mother her life. He stepped into the bedroom and his vision tunneled. All he could see was the bed where Sarah had died 7 years ago. Then Grace spoke. Cole, come meet your son. She was sitting up, alive, smiling at him with tears on her cheeks, holding a squalling bundle against her chest. Blood stained the sheets, but Grace was pink-cheeked and bright-eyed and breathing. Alive. Cole's knees buckled. He caught himself on the doorframe, his breath coming in ragged gasps that might have been sobs. You're all right, he managed. You're really all right. I told you I would be. Grace's smile was tired but genuine. Come here. Don't you want to hold your son?" Cole crossed the room on shaking legs, looked down at the tiny red-faced creature in Grace's arms. His son. His living, breathing, perfect son, born without taking his mother's life. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and Grace placed the baby in his arms. Cole had forgotten how small newborns were, how fragile, how terrifyingly precious. "We did it," Grace whispered. "We made it through." Cole looked at his wife, this woman who'd survived Vernon Blackwood's cruelty and Curtis Lang's schemes and childbirth all in the span of 18 months, and felt something break open in his chest. Not grief this time, something else, something that felt like hope. "We did," he agreed, his voice rough. "We really did." For the first time in 7 years, Cole Brennan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved happiness. That maybe the universe wasn't just taking and taking. That maybe he could have this, a wife who lived, a son who thrived, a future that didn't end in loss. He held his son and his wife close and let himself feel it. Joy. Pure and uncomplicated and long overdue. "It's a boy," Grace said, and I'm fine. We're both fine." Cole crossed the room in 3 strides, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. He looked at his son with wonder, touching the tiny hand with one rough finger. "He's perfect." "He is," Grace agreed. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names for months, but never settled on anything. Now, looking at this new life they'd created together, Cole said, "Samuel, after my father. He was a good man, worked hard, loved his family, built something that lasted." "Samuel Brennan," Grace tested the name. "It's perfect." Lily met her baby brother that evening, her eyes huge with wonder. "He's so small. Was I that small?" "You were," Cole confirmed, "and just as loud." "Can I hold him?" Grace helped Lily settle with the baby, supporting his head carefully. The little girl stared at her brother with fierce protectiveness already blooming on her young face. "I'm going to teach him everything," Lily declared. "How to ride horses and read books and find bird nests. I'm going to be the best big sister ever." "I know you will," Grace said, her heart full to bursting. That night, after Lily was asleep and the baby was fed and changed and settled in his cradle, Cole and Grace lay in bed together. Cole's hand rested on Grace's stomach, no longer swollen but soft and empty. "I was so afraid," he admitted quietly. "When labor started, all I could think about was Sarah, how I lost her, how history might repeat. But it didn't. I'm here. Samuel's here. We're a family." "We are," Cole agreed. "A real family. Not trying to replace what was lost, but building something new, something ours." Grace turned to face him in the darkness. "Do you ever regret it? Hiring me that day? Taking a chance on a woman with a suspicious story and trouble following her?" "Every day," Cole said, then smiled at her sharp intake of breath. "I regret not trusting you sooner, not seeing what you were offering, not recognizing that you were exactly what this ranch needed, what Lily needed, what I needed. We were both broken when we met." "We were, but Grace, there's this thing about broken things. When you repair them properly, they're stronger than before. The cracks become part of the design instead of flaws." Grace thought about the scars she carried, visible and invisible. The trauma of Vernon's captivity, the grief of losing her parents, the years of poverty and struggle. All of it had shaped her, hardened her, made her into someone who could survive the harsh Wyoming winters and build a life from nothing. "We're stronger together," she said. "We are," Cole confirmed. In his cradle, baby Samuel made soft, sleeping sounds. Outside, the ranch settled into night. Cattle lowed in distant pastures. Horses moved in their stalls. The wind whispered through the grass, like secrets being shared between the earth and sky. Grace closed her eyes and let herself feel it. Safety, belonging, love that wasn't possessive or controlling, but liberating. She'd traveled 1,000 miles and survived hell to find this, and it was worth every step. The years that followed brought their share of challenges, droughts and harsh winters, market crashes and cattle diseases. but Broken Creek Ranch survived and eventually thrived. Grace proved to have a head for business, negotiating better prices for their beef, diversifying into horses and sheep when cattle markets were down. Lily grew into a capable young woman, eventually marrying a neighboring rancher's son and starting her own family nearby. She never forgot Grace's kindness, the way she'd stepped into the role of mother when Lily needed one most. Samuel grew strong and curious, learning the ranch from his father, learning compassion and strength from his mother. More children followed, 2 more sons and a daughter. The house filled with life and noise and love. In the summer of 1887, on the 2nd anniversary of Grace's arrival at Broken Creek, she and Cole took a rare afternoon away from work. They rode up to the high pasture overlooking the ranch, dismounted, and sat on the grass watching their world spread below them. The ranch had grown. More buildings now, more cattle, more hands to help with the work. What had been a struggling operation was now prosperous and stable. "Do you ever miss Boston?" Cole asked. Grace considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss my old life, the simplicity of it, knowing exactly what each day would bring, but I don't miss who I was there. That frightened girl with no hope and no future. She was brave enough to answer a stranger's letter, to travel west alone, to survive Vernon's hell and keep moving forward. She was desperate," Grace corrected. Desperation and bravery look similar from the outside but feel different on the inside. "And now? Now I'm brave by choice instead of necessity. I choose to stay here, choose to face each challenge, choose this life and this family every single day." Cole's hand found hers in the grass. "I choose it too. Choose you. Every day." They sat in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the endless Wyoming sky. Below them, tiny figures moved around the ranch, their children playing, cowboys working, life continuing in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Grace thought about the mail-order bride advertisements that had started this journey. Respectable woman seeks new start in the West. That's what she'd been. Desperate for a fresh beginning, willing to risk everything for a chance at something better. She'd found it, not in the way she'd expected, not through marriage to a stranger or salvation from a rescuer, but through her own strength, her own choices, her own refusal to give up when everything seemed impossible. She'd been called a mail-order bride, a thief, a liar. She'd been property and victim and refugee. But she'd become so much more. She'd become Grace Brennan, ranch owner, mother, partner to a good man who'd learned to love again, survivor who'd transformed her scars into stories of strength. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked, watching her face. Grace smiled. "I'm thinking about how far we've come, about second chances and new beginnings, about how sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us exactly where we're meant to be." Cole pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. "You were meant to be here, with me, with our family, building this life." "I was," Grace agreed. "I just had to survive hell to get here. Was it worth it?" Grace looked at the ranch below, at the home they'd built, at the future stretching golden before them like the prairie grass in summer sun. "Every single step," she said. And as the afternoon light turned the world to amber, Grace Whitmore Brennan, former mail-order bride, survivor, fighter, mother, and partner, sat with her husband on a hill in Wyoming and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The journey had been hard, the price had been high, but the destination, this life she'd built from ashes and determination, was worth more than all the suffering it had taken to reach it. She'd come west looking for honest work and honest pay. She'd found a home instead, a family, a future, and that was worth everything.